Good morning, welcome back. You're watching Daybreak on Citizen Television. Thank you for staying with us. With me in the studio is Gabriel Muduma, on my far right, governance and political commentator. Good morning, Gabriel. As well as Wakili Duncan Okach, who is a constitutional lawyer. Wakili, thank you for your time and company as well. Thank you. The front pages of the publication, the front page of the Daily Nation says why Raila's city protests flopped. Blame game over yesterday's demonstrations as the Mio protests fizzled out yesterday, says the paper, with the opposition accusing the government of deploying police and goons to scuttle their march. But the authorities say protesters were engaging in hooliganism and destruction of property. The Standard says Raila calls for more demonstrations as talks stall. The opposition leaders said they'll be back on the streets tomorrow on Thursday, accusing the government of withdrawing their security and lying on the cost of maize flour. The announcement came as the governor sought to break the Raila-Ruto impasse. That story is further highlighted on pages number 6 and 7 of the publication. Gabriel, to you. Talks have stalled again to the streets, an extra day within the week on Thursday tomorrow. I mean, this runs opposite in the face of political instability, isn't it?
That is very true, Ayub, and good morning to our viewers. First of all, I think there's something Wakili may know in Latin that they talk about Iubrima fidei, which they say you must apply utmost good faith. And this is really established when you're coming to negotiate on anything. Some will say you come with clean hands, others say you come with utmost good faith. So you had a coalition, or you had a group that said, let's talk, and opened an environment which seeks to establish what you would call an arrangement where people can sit, discuss, deliberate, and see whether they can come up with a way forward. I think that environment has been watered down. One group has said there is no good faith. And as such, you're left wondering if you have an environment that has been created to talk. The best you'd have applied, the very least you'd have expected is just to show up and figure out how do we address the matters that we feel needs to be or need to be addressed using this environment and what you have created. Remember, one of these groups, which happened to be Kenya Kwanza and Azimio, Kenya Kwanza has said this is how we want the discussions or the talk structured. The others have said, no, first of all, yes, we want them out of the environment that you have recommended, which is parliament. And we want it somewhere else, just like what we've had in the past. But now, Ayub, from where we sit, you start asking certain questions. If you remove such discussions from a structured environment, immediately, you've created an imbalance, because where it is structured, where you have something we call a Hansard, where you have an environment where you can be able to follow, the public can be able to follow, as opposed to a closed-door meetings at some hotel, where you bring a paper and say, same way we did. We had the very same thing that people are talking about. We had a situation led by the then senators, Kiraito Morongi and Senator Orengo. And they brought a paper to Parliament and said, do not remove or add a comma or a zero or any letter. What has that brought to us? Did it not establish a commission that we are so against today as well? So what exactly, what will change this time? Because that environment has been there before. Why don't we try this? That is structured, that has a proper follow-up. The public can be able to follow up. As far as I know, many people like us and Wakili here would even ask for some of those discussions, since there's nothing we are hiding as a country. They are open for the public to see and follow those deliberations. Okay.
Wakili, then the accusation by the Kenya Kwanza or the government is the shifting of the goalposts by the opposition, and the opposition accuses the administration of political poaching of its members and decrying the inclusion of Adan Keynan, the eldest member of parliament, in the committee that represents the Kenya Kwanza administration. I mean, then will it be all down to the two principals, the president and the opposition leader, shedding off the leaders who are holding the grandstanding position to rather focus on the main agendas here and shepherd this entire process?
Yes, thank you so much, Ayub, for having me today. Indeed, someone would look at it from that perspective and say that through whichever process, if the issue of the two members from each side is dealt with, then we will actually have a way forward. But I think that will still not give you a way forward, because there are still other issues which have been raised and which will still form part of the dispute or the impasse that is there. One is even the agenda itself. You know, they are speaking from different points of views. One indicates that some of these items should be on the agenda table. Others are saying no, the only thing that should be on the agenda table should be A, B, and C, or maybe the issue of IEBC specifically. So you will still have a stalemate or a standoff. And I think the essence of this is because in terms of what gave birth to this process, it was actually midwifed not by the principals themselves, but by persons who actually tried to be the go-in-between. But there is no time, and this has been admitted by the president, has been admitted by the leader of opposition. Mm-hmm. They've not spoken. So, of course, there will still be that tension, though it's still a game of cards. And even what is being put on the table is actually not what they want to discuss. That is what I believe. What you are seeing, even if each and every agenda as is being proposed is put on the table, I still believe what the opposition wants to be discussed is exactly what is not on the table. So that's why you'll find that there are issues. And I've said before, if you look at the nature of the protests, it is actually...
Okay, before we come to the protests, because it's what informs some of the outlined issues, and that is on the high cost of living, the IEBC and the reinstatement of Cherera for who resigned. And we understand that there is already a process in motion of getting the next crop of the poll commission leadership. And then what they say must be the stoppage of the government's buying spree of MPs, which is largely down to the place of policies and ideologies. We'll be talking about that. I mean, how practical then is it from the constitutional perspective of stopping the IEBC process, which is already in motion, to get the next chairperson and the commissioners? And then how do you treat resigned commissioners who the opposition demand must be reinstated?
Of course, I think in terms of negotiations, people will aim at the sun, knowing that they want to land at the moon. So some of these demands, of course, they are impractical in terms of reinstatement of the Cherera 4. That's a constitutional process and a legal process that led to the ouster, and some of them actually resigned. So you cannot unresign. You understand? It was actually a resignation is akin to, is voluntary. So you cannot then, there is no space where you can then reverse it at will. It has been accepted and the country has moved on that. What I know that can be at least tinkered with is a process that is ongoing. Because if there is a formula or there is some consensus from these bipartisan talks, if they so proceed, that will take center stage. And it's not the first time that such discussions have led to some consensus, and it has led to a discussion towards even IEBC. That is why the former ECK team actually ended up leaving office before their term, and I've seen the chair wrote a book, and he has explained all these therein, and it means that even for them, they then put the country first as opposed to themselves. Of course, any issue that they have can be dealt with, but I believe that is a process that can be reversed. And even today, Ayub, yes, that process is not moving as fast as it should have. I think just because it will show bad faith on the part of the government that they are speeding up this process, which then will mean that the discussions by the bipartisan team will actually be overtaken by events.
Okay. That is the IBC, not ECK, of Isaac Hassan, who unceremoniously left office in 2016 following the sustained opposition protests. Gabriel,
yes.
And top on the list of what the opposition demands is what's a common denominator. It's the high cost of living.
Correct.
Affects all of us.
Correct.
It isn't just an opposition-driven aspect. It also affects all Kenyans. But you have an opposition pushing for that, and at some point during the campaigns, rather not paid so much interest in it when the former Prime Minister and Martha Karua were called upon on the issue of the high cost of living, which they said, which the opposition principal said, acheni kubweka on the high cost of living. At the time also, the then Deputy President and the UDA presidential candidate, William Ruto, denied the effects of and the consequences of the war in Ukraine on the food chain across the globe.
Correct.
Here you have a political establishment that's rather punching the Kenyan public on the face and taking them for a ride. When can they change course and focus on what's of significance to the Kenyan populace?
Ayub, another great question. But let's start by what you've actually talked about. One, key among them, that this is a global phenomenon. I was actually looking at the Geopoll sometime 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, and how this high cost of living has actually dented many economies, not only in Kenya. South Africa is actually probably grappling with the same issues that we are grappling with. And it's only South Africa alone. Nearly almost all countries in Africa are the same. Here we are not even talking about other nations outside the continent, even though if you look at the Geopoll, everybody is talking about some of the effects that some of the, what you call the geopolitics, have brought all of us to this table where the cost of living is high. Now, I think to better address that issue that we're talking about is that it did not happen yesterday. Yep. Neither did it happen a year ago. There are certain factors that have led all of us to be where we are. Yeah? And it is very easy to blame an individual or a leader. You can blame the president, you can blame the opposition, but the truth of the matter remains that this is a global phenomenon that has happened, that we must address as a matter of supreme urgency and importance. When you are talking about the escalating of food prices, this is something that started a long time ago, and I'm glad you've actually brought the example that the people who are in Azimio, the people who are back then were in what you would call politically in bed with government, were saying, you know, msibwekebweke, this is an issue that is affecting everyone. Only for the tune to change just because you did not get the coveted price that you're looking at. But if you are to make it a national agenda, you have to come again on the table of discussion with utmost good faith, trying to understand that there is something happening that was not there before. What am I talking about? You're talking about the rainfall. They are here. And you know very well, for the past 4 years, if we were to put it correctly, if we were to be honest and have an honest conversation, you would realize we have not been having enough rainfall. Now the rains are here. You can expect some of the staple food that we have. You can expect the electricity cost to go lower. I mean, it's common knowledge that every time we do not have enough rainfall, due to our dependency, high dependence on hydro, electricity the cost of electricity, which sometimes in turns affects the cost of production, will go up as you know, as something which is it's something which is balancing to the effect that our dams are going low, and so we resort to using the diesel generator, which are very expensive to run. And so when you are having this conversation back to back, Ayub, we must realize that the foundation belief of what we are asking for as a sit down is that, first of all, we are dealing with a global phenomenon. If we are going to make it a national agenda, and this is why I keep insisting, let us come with the true realization that we are discussing a subject that must be dealt with honestly and without bias. Moving forward to the issues that are happening in Europe, I think with time, Ayub, it may die down. We may probably go back, as we have seen with the strategic application of the oil now. You saw the other day, I think it was maybe a few weeks ago, when the president came out and said that they have reached a deal with oil producers and how they will be buying oil, how they will be buying the oil, not with the dollar, but really with the local currency. We are yet to see how that will work, but if it does, that's a genius move, because that just tells you now that you expect either to arrest the pricing and the costs that are going high, or you expect them to come down. So I think as much as we agree something is being done, we must always revert back to honest discussions and honest debates.
Okay, Wakili, and you said that blame game, I mean, responsibility falls somewhere. So we expect the political leadership to address some of these problems. And you realize even the opposition lawmakers who protested yesterday are in parliament, therefore the focus should be on policy as to how they can change the gear towards food production, making the country food secure, I mean, focusing on productivity-led economy.
Very good, Ayub, and that is why every person, me and you, any peace-loving Kenya, any progressive mind should actually throw the ball back to parliament where the laws are made. Yeah? We need to know the kind of discussions, sober discussions that are going on at the floor of the House. What are you people coming up with? We have elected you to think of ways to alleviate, some of these challenges that we are having. Okay. That is why we must always insist for sober debates when it comes to such national agendas. The problem has always been, if we politicize this issue too much, it is very easy for Wakili and myself to think that somebody has fumbled or somebody is sleeping on the job.
Wakili, before we finish up on this and focus on what's happening and the jam in the Jubilee Party, more protests the opposition called for. Tomorrow is going to be again back to the streets against the backdrop of visiting heads of states and governments who will be trooping into Nairobi this week, including the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. And we understand also the Japanese Prime Minister. Yesterday, the Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister met President William Ruto. I mean, what will this then portend for the country's image, which rather seems to be tainted in the face of its peers in the community amongst the community of nations?
Yes, I think that's why at a point people are saying we need to put our country first, because Kenya has always been indicated to be the island of peace, And at this particular point where we are having issues, we had issues in Eritrea, we have issues in Sudan. We are still not very certain with South Sudan. So at least Kenya gives that particular balance. But in terms of now the political peace, we do not have that, and we've not had it for quite a long time. And it will be a very bad or sad image that will be portrayed tomorrow in the presence of visitors, when indeed riots will be going on left, right, center. And of course, the eyes of the world will then be focusing on us to the extent of these visiting heads of states and government. So it means that it is better to try and clean up our issues, internally, as opposed to continuing with this issue. And that's why it is important for us as Kenyans to find a solution to this particular impasse that is there, because it is not practical, it's not proper, and you cannot also ignore these particular protests or demonstrations. It will have an effect whether we want it or not, whether we bury our heads in the sand or not. So the sooner that we see leaders, and I think this is where leadership actually can be seen, in such tough times, is when you actually see the mettle or the kind of leaders that we have. Because ideally, at this particular point, we cannot be in corners championing and supporting when the effects are actually very, very clear to the common man. And eventually, when it comes to the international play, it is our image that is actually being destroyed.
Gabriel, let's focus on the story on the Daily Nation on page number 8. The battle for the control of the Jubilee Party escalated yesterday, says the paper, after a faction allied to President William Ruto kicked out former President Uhuru Kenyatta as the party leader and replaced him with nominated MP Sabina Chege. This while threatening to expel him altogether, but his camp dismissed the All-Stars null and void ab initio. That story is also covered on the Standard newspaper on page number 5. Sabina replaces, says the paper, Uhuru in Jubilee leadership coup that is also covered by both papers. I mean, why the sudden difference between what President Uhuru Kenyatta, then Deputy President William Ruto, promised Kenyans as a party that will have an outlook of a national composition, today appear to be disenfranchised?
First of all, when you talk matters Jubilee, sometimes I think it's so unfortunate that this can happen to one of, or what some of us thought was one of the most progressive parties of the future, or coalitions, if you will. A few years removed, this party, even before we enter to the discussion on what happened or who is being dropped or who is being kicked, at one point had a near supermajority in the National Assembly. 170. Yeah, can you imagine? Led in the county assemblies, number of senators, if you look, governors, women rep. And today we are discussing the same party that after the 2022 elections has a paltry membership or leadership in Parliament
less than
30, 28 to be specific. And it just actually drives you to wonder how easy or how fast faith can erode in a particular party if you don't put your house in order. And I think this is what is happening to Jubilee. The mere fact that they never put their house in order. There was a time members were crying for, to ask the top leadership, let us have a NEC meeting, let us have a meeting. No meeting was coming along. And so if you do not harness, and there's some other things, there are things we learn here and there. During the height of Jubilee, they were all over trying to see how ANC of South Africa is being run. They went all the way, some members went all the way to China to see how the Communist Party of China is being run, how they are able to administer such, good governance or whatever they call structures to be able to run such a huge party. But now when you look at it in foresight, you realize some of the major mistakes that they've done really was actually drained to the very same facts that they are fighting today. So here you have the top echelons or the leader of the party, who happens to be the former president, the immediate former president of this country, who is now really fighting for the same space with some of the junior members back then, who at one point could not have raised a finger. And this is sometimes why I keep insisting. There's a lesson we learn from past leadership, which says that sometimes the credibility of your term or your credibility of your existence as a leader must always be superior than the longevity of it. Meaning that I do not see any reason as to why. And if I was to be asked, what would you tell the former president? I would tell him such things you do not need to be even entangled with. As somebody who has served Kenya, and many people say you did your part and you did it well. Some of these things you just ignore and move on. Because what we expect, Ayub, and I don't think it has started. It will be a push and pull.
Before the expectation and what appears to be the friction amongst members of the party, I mean, was it all then principally based on the foundation of the party leadership, in this case the personalities, while not focusing on the structures which ought to have strengthened the party, past the president and even the former deputy president who is now the leader of the Kenya Kwanza Alliance? I mean, was there more focus on the principles than the very foundation that ought to have anchored the party?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. You see, they say when you lead well, when you lead without bias, when you lead people properly, when you lead people peacefully, in a manner that is being understood and where you are caring for each and every member, your followers will definitely follow you with the same arrangement that you lead them. If you lead them through chaos and through silos, this is bound to happen. And I believe this is what has happened. The top leadership of Jubilee Party at some point fumbled, and they fumbled very badly. Within the party, most of them started their own silos. And this is what you're finding right now. And it did not happen just the other day.
Okay.
Yeah, this is something that you can say started immediately Jubilee won the 2017 elections. And that is why you saw a huge portion of members left to go and join another party. If you had the leadership of Jubilee back then, if their pulse was straight within the party, all these things would have been sorted.
Okay.
But I think at some point they fumbled, and this is the price they have to pay.
But Wakili Dan Okatch, why then do you think might have informed or prompted the sudden descendancy from stratospheric political heights for the Jubilee Party to its current status?
I think the answer to that, I will look at it from a simplistic point of view. The fact that power has left that particular party. And the moment power leaves that party, then of course, the power is actually what held this party together. They came together, remember the history of Jubilee and URP at that particular point. Later on, there was discontent, and eventually the moment another party actually, or another coalition took over in terms of the elections, of course, this party was so used to power, especially when the fact that now the person in leadership is no longer powerful. You do not have that muscle to deal with it. And it is the norm in all parties. I don't think it is, you can just isolate Jubilee and say there's something they did so wrong. But we've seen the history of parties in this particular country. We do not have parties which are hinged on proper ideologies that will transcend even the leadership of those parties. Because we have parties that are parties which are akin to the owners of those particular parties. If those owners decide to fold that party and move to another party, people move with them, which is unfortunate. And if that party remains as it is, it becomes just a vehicle that is available for purchase by any other person. That's why parties are always purchased and rebranded. And I believe any party today can be purchased, rebranded, and it can even win elections. So that's why I always say, in Kenya, we cannot say that we have, major strong parties. We have strong personalities.
Okay, but then why then do you think they made such a grand promise when they knew they will use and trash that vehicle in 2016, and understandably that it's the taxpayers who fund the political parties?
The taxpayers fund political parties, but you must know that we are still trying, in terms of the legal framework and regime, to at least improve that. And we have come from quite a distance. The only problem is that politics always comes in and they still try to tamper with the proper hygienic legislations that have been put. Just again, because it is political parties that come and control parliament. So unfortunately, that's where we are. But we have come a long way. But even if you look at it internationally, it is normal when a leader leaves office or their term comes to an end, there is always a struggle. Look at when Barack Obama was leaving. For you to actually know that who will, from that particular party, take over, it was a struggle. It is normal. There is fallout here and there. It is normal. Even in our neighboring country, Uganda, you can see there's already some issues in terms of who will succeed within the party that has been there for ages. So that struggle will always be there. But unfortunately, if the parties are not hinged on ideology, you'll find that people will just move to the next available vehicle. So that party just becomes, a vehicle to the next agenda. But we should strengthen parties, and I think that's what I see the president of this country trying so hard to maintain. And I think that's why he actually fought so hard for Jubilee to remain as Jubilee during that time, because they wanted it to transcend this particular leadership. It has not worked. Of course, Jubilee is a shell, but now as we look at it, we have had parties like KANU, which ruled this country for ages, but now it's just a moribund party there, but still in existence. And it can always be revived, that I know. So it's for us now to see whether, because there are already talks that even ODM, as it is already now changing, I think, to MDG or MDC. There's a movement that they are coming up, and we've always seen that transformation.
Okay.
But it is important for leaders to create parties that will outlive them in terms of strength. Okay. That's the most important.
Wakili, it's evident parties have been created. It's the leadership that seems to be the problem.
Correct.
And the cause of the stagnation of parties, which are hinged on politics and ideologies. And Gabriel, I came to you on that. One of the demands that the opposition has to the government is to put a stop to MPs buyout spree, according to the Azimio Coalition political party. I mean, but an MP drives himself to State House or whatever to meet the president of the day and the present government or any other government. How then can you stop the conscience of a grown-up in the status with the status of an MP? And is this perhaps, again, another effect and the consequences that personalities are having on the conduct of parliamentarians in not focusing on priority items that affect the Kenyan people and rather go by what the party leadership says, even if that is opposing a motion that might lead to job creation, ending corruption? I mean, how then can we treat all this disease that seems to be having the mutating effect within the political establishment?
Another great question, Ayub. Let me tell you, first of all, I think I've always said when it comes to matters party leadership, it all rises and falls, just like in many institutions with leadership. And I think sometimes the con of politicians actually manifests itself better when you have an environment like the one you're explaining. It is okay for my party leader, and this is the con I call on politicians, to try and push an agenda so that he can meet the head of state. But it is wrong for a sitting member of parliament or a governor who belongs to their party when they push to meet with the same head of state. Albeit the fact that this is their leader as well. You see, that's a little bit connish. In that, if you're my party leader, it would be okay for you, even though you're in the opposition, to look for a framework to meet with the leadership, the head of state. But when I do it because I belong to your party, it becomes that I'm a sellout. You see, it's a con in leadership sometimes, and I don't think it's the right thing. That is number one. Number two, I don't think I have ever advocated, and I'll never do this, for people who are elected to follow robotic instructions. It is wrong. As a matter of fact, you have your own mind. You have your own conscience. You know what your people need. And at any given time, if it matters to the people that you represent, then by all means, go for it. If that means meeting somebody who is not within your realm of party leadership, then so be it, because you were elected by the people who are expecting several things from you in matters probably in terms of development and what have you. The question which must again transcend our smallness is, Ayub, that if there's a debate on the floor of the House and it does not augur well with the people you represent, and you have a party that has taken a position, which you know very well that their position is fragrant to the people that you represent, that is a law you should not follow. Because at the end of the day, if you are in tune with the people that you represent, they really come first. Yes, we all agree that you're, in a way, you're tied to your party through certain laws, whatever you may call it, or party guidelines, whatever it is. But I think the people who must come first are the people that you represent. Okay. I'll give you an example.
Before the example, Gabriel, three components here. But the constant factor in this equation are the Kenyan people.
Correct.
Therefore, whatever your party leader says or the leadership says must not override the priority issues of the public.
Correct.
Because they fund that very political system in terms of the political parties fund, in terms of the salaries of these politicians, in terms of how parliament runs, and the government of the day.
Totally.
But that hasn't been the case. Therefore, it cannot be excuse for politicians to abandon the Kenyan people at the hour of need.
I agree. I agree. I agree. And why we may all probably have our ducks swimming in a row when it comes to what Kenyans want is our smallness must be moved out so that the mwananchi is given the services that they require. What I'm against and what I can be against and what I believe many Kenyans will be against is you following a particular instruction, A, to try and twist leadership, or to try and gain advantage selfishly and thereby telling your people to vote a certain way, even though you know it's at the detriment of the people that they represent. That is morally corrupt, all right? So I think it is only fair that the people who voted for you, when they have needs that can be solved by mechanisms that are without your party, then you do what is right and what is morally correct.
And which is the priority part of what the Kenyan people want. We'll come to the question about the Chinese question, how they plan to copy the Communist Party of China model, which celebrated 100 years in 2021 with over 90 million membership. Xi Jinping, the structures there, and we'll talk about the ANC and the peer parties of KANU and the ruling former party Jubilee in Zimbabwe, that's ZANU-PF, and also in Tanzania, the ANC, the Chama cha Mapinduzi. Wakili Danokaj, we talked about the overwhelming focus on the party leadership at the top, which has had effect on the downward next itemized issue, which is parliamentarians who seem to be hell-bent on addressing issues of the top leadership rather than the bottom, who are the people. And then the people themselves are now bearing a responsibility at the ballot when it comes to electing people with integrity, good record in public service, which seems to be a distant far from the practice we have at the moment. There are some political parties who command support in some regions, and when you get the ticket, despite your integrity, despite who you are, then that's as good as election once you're done with the nominations. The public also have a responsibility, is it, of the leadership we have at the moment, who seem not to be so emphasized on the need of the same very public.
Ayuba, it is always, there's an old adage that says, you know, you get the leaders that you deserve. And that's why people are given the right to choose. And if they decide to choose Barnabas, so be it. You go by that. So, and you cannot thereafter complain. So at this particular point, we cannot then complain in terms of the caliber of leaders that we have elected, because as a society, that is a representation of who we are, and the majority will always have their way, the minority will have their say. But having said so, there's an issue that I'm picking up from what my brother Muduma has indicated, which is closely tied to your question. It will not be proper to indicate that the moment someone has been elected, they can thereafter go on a floric of their own and make their own decisions, and it is assumed it is the decisions of the people. That is why the Constitution has a very fundamental provision in terms of public participation. And even in those decisions that these people make, it is important for them to adopt the spirit of public participation. So if you are elected under a certain party's ticket, if you had indicated this is how we will work as I proceed, that is a commitment you've made to your people. The moment you do a major about turn, it is only proper for you to go back to the people and say, I'm thinking this is the way to go. Let those people give you the blessings. Do not assume that you make those decisions now and you make an about turn and that's it. And that's why there is a recall clause which ought to be activated, and for people to always say, if you don't go in terms of our aspirations, we can recall you. As I say so, we are talking about the import of having strong parties, like you are saying we are going to discuss the Communist Party in China. You know, you cannot have that if you do not have party hygiene. And it is important for people to accept this, whether they're in the ruling coalition or they're in the opposition. Hygiene is so important because it affects both ways. Today you might be in power, you might enjoy what Gabriel is indicating. Tomorrow you'll be on the other side and you'll actually feel that it is proper to have proper hygiene. It is not wrong for someone to go and visit the head of state, the deputy president, or even anyone in government, even the county commissioners. But when it is about a political issue, it is only proper to inform your party that this is actually, I've been invited and I'm going for this particular purpose. Okay. It is only fair. Otherwise, if you don't do that, it will mean that what people are calling political prostitution will continue. It's important because you gave him the time, and it's good to have this other perspective so that we understand each other on this. So it is important to avoid that in a manner that you'd always say that it will not be right for you to put it like Muthoma says, that if you think you can get some benefit from this office, then so be it, you go there. It is not right because in the constitutional dispensation that we have, the government has been elected into office to serve all Kenyans, regardless of whether you'll pay a visit or someone will pay a visit or not. They are supposed to serve all Kenyans. And over and above that, the cake has been distributed to counties. Okay. So the money goes to the county down there. So if you are to visit a certain office, it should not be that you are going to visit so that you get out of there with the development. It means, Ayub, if your MP does not visit there, then his MP will actually come with more development goodies as opposed to yours. That's discriminatory. Okay. Interdependence is
agreeable within the political dispensation, but that doesn't mean that you have the license to do a hop, step and jump political jump towards a political end. But as we finish up on this, Gabriel, the Communist Party of China, the ANC party, it censured its former president, Jacob Zuma, its former leader, corruption allegations. That's the extent of, I mean, a thriving democracy. You look at the Communist Party of China, notwithstanding the perspective to which the West looks at China in terms of its human rights records. I mean, where then did the Jubilee Party drop the ball? Is it the integrity of the party membership and its leadership? Is it the structures that were faulty, that couldn't hold up? I mean, what really then leads to the very glaring inconsistencies of what they promised and where we are today?
First of all, the parties that you've actually given an example of when you talk about the Communist Party of China, when you look at ANC, when you look at at CCM in Tanzania, ZANU-PF, and most of these are the parties that have existed for the longest. Even in the US, you can look at the Democratic and the Republican Party. First thing that you will, that is glaring and comes to the fore is that, first of all, these parties are built with very good structures. And they hold that the party and the members are more important than one single individual. Yes, you can have one person who is at the helm of that pinnacle or a leader at that particular time, but the members have a very big sway and also a very big say as far as party matters go. So that is one clear distinction that you make with these parties that have existed for longest. The other thing is that their guiding principles are very well articulated. If you look at ANC, they have those recall clauses that they can actually chastise and recall a sitting president. And once they get him out of that particular party, he doesn't have any other option than to resign from that highly coveted seat. Okay. So I think the first thing that the takeaway is the leadership of that particular party, but most importantly, the structures and the powers that members are able to wield. Something that probably, I will digress just a little bit with what is currently happening, and the question that you had asked earlier, Ayub, is I have never, and I wouldn't advocate that member of a particular coalition can just wake up and decide to do their own things. I understand what Wakili is talking about when he talks about party hygiene. That's not what I'm talking about. If there's a political angle where your party must marshal up numbers or something which is so detrimental that can be argued through parliament, they're by all means necessary. You vote with what your party wants. And this has been the tradition for the longest. But when it comes something, because sometimes you have bipartisan support, you've seen that. You know, people are called to vote a certain way because of a particular agenda, which sometimes may actually be regional.
Okay.
I am saying here you can have a particular members who come from one area and they are voting for a certain thing. They may actually be from different parties.
Thank you.
But because of the kind of change and transformation they want in a particular region, they vote in one side.
Thank you.
Now, that is not to say that they must vacate from their the parties that brought them to parliament.
Thank you. Who are the people in this case? Yes, Wakili, as we finish up the final comments. Going forward, then, we have the president at the moment has been a member of KANU, then ODM, URP, Jubilee, and now a UDA party member. You look at the former prime minister, he was a member of KANU at some point before forming the ODM party, and at the moment still holding some ground since the referendum in 2005. Applies also to members of the political establishment as well. Do you foresee a perpetual continuity, or rather political parties that are anchored on pillars of ideologies and policies, which is what it ought to be in a multi-party democracy?
Ayub, the future is not bright in terms of that particular perspective. And you can even see, and I've indicated, it's very clear the president wants to create a party that would actually outlive him. But if you look at even what is happening, the UDA Secretary General actually tried to say everyone should fold their parties and actually be in one party in terms of the coalition, the ruling coalition. That talk died immediately because there was a lot of resistance. And it then means that we will have the status quo maintaining maybe even after 2027. But towards 2032, when we'll be having the general elections now, if the president wins, and it will be a time that we are sure that a new president will be elected, you'd actually still see the same issues. You can see Jubilee trying so hard to get into the fold of Kenya Kwanza. So it will still mean that these issues of parties will still remain, and we will not have, like we've seen in America and many progressive states, 2 or 3 parties anchored on ideology. Today, Ayub, if someone tells you that he belongs to the Kenya Kwanza, any of the Kenya Kwanza parties, the only ideology is bottom-up. That's not an ideology that will actually transcend for quite some time. It is only for a season. But you need to have ideologies that will actually be anchored and will remain relevant over and over in terms of the period of time. If you look at the Azimio side, in fact, they don't have an ideology. At least this one has an ideology. Them, they don't have. It is a coalition that has just brought parties. But what is ideology? Their essence is getting power. And that's why once any of these parties gets power, they tend to now reverberate around the main person there. Remove the main person, we have no party.
Thank you. Wakili Dan Okatch, your time is all appreciated. Thank you so much for making time. Gabriel Muthuma, governance and political commentator, your time is as well appreciated. Many thanks for joining us on the broadcast to look at the pages of the publications and the major stories happening in the country. When we get back from the break, we talk to the Principal Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the status and the assessment of Sudan, the evacuation done by the government, the regional stability progress Kenya is taking part in terms of extending its military and diplomatic leverage to stabilize a region that is rather turbulent, and also what's happening in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where Kenya has forces, and what seems to be a 3-pronged foreign policy approach, and also a changing world from what appears to be concerns into the encroachment of multilateralism and a focus on unilateralism. Kenya's place among the community of nations after serving as a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. All that after the break with the Principal Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Abraham Korir Sing'oei. Stay tuned.